welcome back to Vital Signs. Today we are talking about mechanisms of disease. If you're new here, I'm Professor Thomas. I'm here to give you a crash course on all things anatomy and physiology. Let's dive in. Health is not just the absence of disease. It means you are thriving mentally, socially, physically. That is health. Disease is any abnormality in body function that threatens health. If we're studying the factors that cause disease, that is etiology. Idiopathic refers to a disease with an unknown cause. Pathogenesis, on the other hand, is the pattern of a disease's development. And a great way to measure disease development is by looking at signs and symptoms. They sound similar, but they're actually different. Signs are things that you can see and measure, like a stop sign. You can see that. A sign would be elevated body temperature. That is something that we can feel and measure. It's real, it's tangible. A symptom, on the other hand, is something the patient is reporting that they are experiencing. We can't see it, but the patient is stating, I have a headache or I have a pain here. When talking about disease, it's important to understand patterns of disease. And the study of that would be epidemiology. Epidemiology is looking at the occurrence and spread of disease within certain populations. If a disease is in the state of an endemic, it's to a local region. But when it progresses to an epidemic, it's affecting multiple people all at once. Once we reach the state of pandemic, this is happening at a global level. Things like COVID-19 come to mind, but also HIV/AIDS is a disease that we can find in every country in the world. There are a lot of different mechanisms that can lead to disease. Some diseases are genetic in their cause, things that are passed down from parent to child. Other diseases are infectious. Some sort of microorganism is involved here, whether that's a bacteria, a fungi, or a virus. There are also neoplastic mechanisms of disease, things like tumors and cancer. Traumatic mechanisms of disease, be that physical or chemical. Metabolic mechanisms of disease, think hormonal imbalances in the body. Inflammatory mechanisms of disease, like autoimmune diseases, fall into this category. And lastly, degenerative diseases like osteoporosis, where the bones start to eat away at themselves. Talking about disease is kind of scary, and there are certain things that can put you at higher risk for disease. Some things you can control, other things are out of your hands. Genetics, I can't control who my parents are. I have no power over that, but it is a mechanism that can potentially lead to disease. Age is another thing. As we get older in age, our odds for developing disease increase. Lifestyle is something you can control. Think of your eating habits, your physical activity, how much sleep you're getting at night. All of those are lifestyle choices. Environmental factors are important as well. If you live in a super polluted area or an overcrowded situation, you're at a higher risk for disease developing. And lastly, pre-existing conditions increase the risk for other diseases developing. Okay, so let's start by talking about pathogenic organisms. We'll begin with viruses. We've all heard of viruses, and viruses are not technically alive because they have to have invaded a host cell in order to reproduce. They can't reproduce on their own. They have their own genetic information, be it DNA or RNA, but they have to invade and pirate a host cell in order to produce more viruses that'll take over more cells. And they're classified by shape, nucleic acid type, DNA or RNA, and method of reproduction. Some examples would be HIV, coronaviruses, or flaviviruses. HIV is a really unique one. This is a retrovirus, meaning it transcribes backwards. If you think of retro like going back in time, that'll help you remember these transcribe backwards. Coronaviruses are covered by a crown of surface projections. It makes them really sticky, and it also makes them change quite frequently, so it's hard to come up with a long-term vaccination against them. That's why we constantly have new versions of the COVID-19 vaccine coming out, because the virus changes and adapts. It is the second leading cause of the common cold after rhinoviruses, and coronaviruses usually lead to respiratory system issues. For flaviviruses, these are all of your mosquito diseases. Think yellow fever, dengue, West Nile virus, all of those are flavivirus diseases. Done with viruses, let's talk about prions. Prions are not viruses. They're not bacteria, they're their own thing. Prions are proteins that make other proteins misfold. Some examples of diseases you might be familiar with would be mad cow disease. You've probably heard of that one. It is a prion disease that causes misfolding of proteins in the nervous system of the cow. Another example would be variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or a really cool one, this is my favorite prion disease, is Kuru, which we'll only ever see in patients that are cannibals, interestingly enough. Moving on to bacteria. Bacteria are tiny cells without nuclei. They have some genetic information, but not enough to require a nucleus. They secrete toxins, they parasitize host cells, they form colonies. We classify them based off of growth requirements. If a bacteria is aerobic, it needs air to live. If a bacteria is anaerobic, it needs a lack of air to live. We can also classify them based off of something called the Gram stain. A Gram stain is a particular stain we do in laboratories where we're dipping our little slide of bacteria in and we see what color it turns out to be at the end. Sometimes bacteria will stain purple. Other times bacteria will stain a pinkish red. If it stains purple, it's Gram positive. If it's a pinkish red, it's Gram negative. What does that tell us? It gives us information about the cell wall. Gram-positive cells, those purple ones, have a really thick peptidoglycan layer. Gram-negative cells, the pinkish-red ones, have a thin peptidoglycan layer, and they're surrounded by an outer membrane. So the color of the Gram stain tells us information about the cell wall of bacteria. A Gram stain is something we can only do to bacteria. Sometimes you'll get a trick question on a test where they talk about Gram stains in viruses. We can't do a Gram stain on a virus. Or Gram stains in fungi. We're not doing a Gram stain on a fungi. Gram stains are exclusive to bacteria. We can additionally classify bacteria based off of their shape and size. If it is a circular shaped bacteria, we call that a cocci. How I remember this is almost every letter of that word looks like a circle. Bacilli are more rod-shaped, and bacilli has two L's. Those kind of form a rod shape in my brain. That's how I visualize it. There are more shapes than just circles and rods, cocci and bacilli. There are some bacteria that'll be curved like a comma, others that are spiral shaped. There's a lot of variety. Fungi are another pathogenic organism. Fungi can be subdivided into three categories. Most people first think of mushrooms, but also yeasts and molds are classified as fungi. Yeast are very small single-celled fungi. Mold are larger multicellular fungi. When someone has a fungal infection, we call this a mycotic infection. Myco is always our root word for something fungal. And mycotic infections are really resistant to treatment, so that's something to keep in mind if you're going into healthcare. Protozoa are large one-celled organisms that have nuclei. They like to infest human fluids and parasitize other cells. Our major groups include amoeba. Amoeba have pseudopodia, which is kind of like a glob. It shoots forward and uses to pull the rest of the body along. Flagellates possess flagella, which we talked about when we went through cells. Ciliates have cilia, another thing that should be reviewed from cells. And those are your major groups of protozoa. Last category of pathogenic organisms and particles would be pathogenic animals. These guys are bigger, things like nematodes, which you might know as roundworms, platyhelminths, which you might know as flatworms, or arthropods like ticks and spiders and mosquitoes. All of those fall in that category. So how do we prevent disease? How do we control diseases and stop them from spreading? It depends on the mechanism of transmission. For example, if we've got a disease that passes from person to person, it's important to avoid that person-to-person contact. That's why we had that 6-foot rule during COVID. So education of the public is really important here. Aseptic technique is really important as well. Vaccination is an option for prevention. It stimulates immunity with some mild side effects occasionally. Or drug therapy. Let's say someone already has a disease. We would treat it with drugs. If it is a bacterial problem, we'd go at it with antibiotics. That's great and highly effective against bacteria. If it's a viral issue, we would not use antibiotics. If it's a viral problem, we could use An antiviral drug, Tamiflu, is a really good example. It doesn't get rid of the virus, but it does slow viral progression. We're talking about neoplasms now, which are tumors. Some tumors are benign, others are malignant. Benign means it's staying in one area, malignant means it can spread. Metastasis is the process of a tumor leaving a primary location and moving and spreading to a secondary location. So if we say cancer has metastasized, it means it has spread, it has moved on to new areas of the body. We classify tumors based on whether they are benign or malignant, epithelial or connective. I'm going to talk about some examples with you. Starting with benign epithelial tumors. A papilloma is a finger-like projection. An adenoma is a glandular tumor. A nevus is a small pigmented tumor. For benign connective tissue tumors, a lipoma is an adipose tissue tumor or a fat tumor. An osteoma is a bone tumor. A chondroma is a cartilage tumor. Moving on to malignant epithelial tumors. A melanoma is a tumor involving melanocytes in the skin. An adenocarcinoma is a malignant glandular tumor. Sarcomas are the malignant connective tissue tumors. We've got a lot here. Lymphomas fall in this category. That would be lymphatic cancer. Osteosarcomas would be bone cancer. Myelomas would be bone marrow tumors. Fibrosarcomas would be tumors of fibrous tissue. Before we move on from tumors, I do want to mention the ABCDEs of melanomas. They help us to identify if a lump or bump is kind of weird or funky looking. A stands for asymmetry, B, border, C, color, D, diameter, and E, evolving. Cancer in general involves two things: hyperplasia, which is too many cells are growing, and anaplasia. Those cells are undifferentiated. What causes cancer? A lot of different things. There are some genetic factors that play a role. Some people have oncogenes, which are cancer-causing genes. Carcinogens are chemicals that can alter genetic activity. For example, tobacco is a well-known carcinogen. Age, as we get older, all the damage that has happened to our cells in our lifetime starts to accumulate, so our risk for cancer increases as we get older. Environment, if we're chronically exposed to damaging substances, absolutely that can lead to cancer. And viruses, some viruses are known to lead to cancer. For example, HPV, human papillomavirus. This is a virus that's screened for when women go in for pap smears. It's a virus that's known to cause cervical cancer. A lot of cancer patients experience something called cachexia. This is a syndrome where we've got appetite loss, weight loss, general tiredness of the body. And how we treat cancer varies depending on the severity of the situation. For example, if we've got a small benign tumor, surgically we can go in and remove that. It's benign, it's not spreading anywhere else. In more severe situations, we could consider chemotherapy, radiation therapy, laser therapy, immunotherapy. There are a lot of different ways to approach cancer because cancer is not a one-size-fits-all. There's just so much variety here. As we wrap things up, let's talk about the inflammatory response. The key signs of inflammation are redness, heat, swelling, and pain. And you'll know this. Have you ever gotten a hangnail and you just rip it off? Ouch. And what happens? The skin gets all red. It's hot to the touch. It swells. It hurts. That's inflammation. So let's talk about what's happening there at the cellular level. When we tear off that hangnail, blood vessels immediately are going to dilate. This increases blood volume in the area. That's what makes it red and hot to the touch. White blood cells, because of that dilation, are able to travel really quickly to that area. Then we see an increase in blood vessel permeability, which is going to lead to the swelling or edema and also some of the pain. We increase blood vessel permeability so that the white blood cells can get to the injured tissues and start to do the work of cleaning up and fixing the issue. So that kind of explains our signs of inflammation: redness, heat, swelling, and pain. And there you have it, guys. Those are our mechanisms of disease. Thanks for joining me this week on Vital Signs. I'll see you next time.